During this movie, I'll be showing you 4 of our Studwork modules. These are Studwork including boarding both sides and plaster, Studwork including boarding one side and plaster, Studwork metal boarding both sides including plaster, and Studwork metal boarding one side including plaster. I'll start by pricing up Studwork with boarding to both sides and plaster, using the Renovations and Alterations Ultra module that has been designed for this task. I'll enter the length of the Studwork here in the red cell. This is 11 linear metres. Then the height of the Studwork. This is 2.4 linear metres. The amount of bottom plates, this is 2, and the number of top plates, 1. Finally, centre noggins for this Studwork wall is 1. The programme has calculated that I'll need 20 studs. I'll now enter 2 internal, external corners and 1 T-section. The total number of studs needed has increased. I'll click on the question mark for the T-sections. 3 studs per T-section are allowed. I will be using this method, but if you're doing something different, you can enter the number of studs you'll be using per T-section here. This could be something that you set in your master copy. This would mean you do not have to change it every time you price. The corners work in the same way. If I click on the question mark, I can see that 3 studs are allowed per corner. This is how I do it, but if you use a different method, then you can alter the number of studs. We would recommend that you do this in your master copy, then it will be set that way for every job you do. The default for my centres is 0.6 linear metres. I will be basing my pricing on this, but just to show you, if you want to change it, you can. For example, if I select 0.4, instantly the pricing sheet adjusts. I will just change this back to 0.6 centres. I'm going to need 12 linear metres for my top plates and noggins, and 24 linear metres for my bottom plates. The costs and hours for my studs and insulation are here. And I'll need 10 sheets of insulation. I'm happy with the material selections, but you can change them if you wish by using the drop-down menus. I do want some door linings. I will have to enter these in, as the programme cannot know if any are needed. I'll want 2, so I put this here, and the material cost, hours for fitting, and labour cost are all worked out. My plasterboard for both sides is here, and I'll need 18 sheets, and the fitting will take 4.5 hours. And here's my scrim tape. The hours for my plastering are all worked out. I'm just going to click on the fixings question mark. This probably wouldn't be something I'd look at every job, but it is worth seeing what the calculation is based on. Then you can set your master copy to your preferences, so they'll be there every time you price with this module. In the diagram, I have 4 fixings per noggin, 4 fixings per stud, and 2 fixings every 0.6 linear metre on my top and bottom plate. If, for example, you put 3 fixings at the top and 3 fixings at the bottom of your stud, you would put 6 in the fixings per stud box. I will be leaving this as it is, but if you do something different, you can change this in here. And as I mentioned, this may be something that you could do in your master copy, and it will be set in your way every time you use this module. The plasterboard fixings are calculated slightly differently, but just as easy to alter if you do something different. First, check the width and length of the board meets with your requirements. The fixings are worked out on a per board basis. This calculation is worked out by the spacing between each fixing. The centres are set at 300mm, and I'll need 33 fixings per board. My centres will be 400mm, so I enter this here and here. I'm now going to need 24 nails per board, and the programme will multiply this number by the amount of plasterboard sheets. Like the fixings for the studs, this wouldn't be something I would look at every time I priced, but rather something I would set up in my master copy. If, for example, you just wanted the cost of the stud frame, you would simply untick the items you didn't need, so the insulation, plasterboard, scrim tape, plastering, plaster, and fixings for the plasterboard, and these costs are instantly removed. Like all our modules, you are in complete control and always have the final say on how you want to carry out and price your jobs. My Studwork including boarding both sides and plaster is calculated, and I can see the totals for my materials, hours, labour and overall total here. As I mentioned at the start of this movie, I'll now show you Studwork including plasterboard one side and plaster. You would use this when you were doing a Studwork wall but only needed to clad one side, So it's perfect for attic space, where you may be boarding a studwork wall at the bottom, or boarding off a masonry wall when you want to create a cavity, for example, a garage conversion. I'll price up using exactly the same measurements and dimensions that I had in the studwork boarding both sides and plaster module. So 11 for the length of the studwork, 2.4 for the height, 2 bottom plates, 1 top plate, 1 centre noggins, my centres at the default 0.6, 2 internal, external corners and 1 T-section. And I will just enter my 2 door linings. As you can see, it follows very much the same format. The main difference, as we are only doing the boarding and plaster to one side, are the quantities, hours and cost of the plastering items. For example, on my one side module I will only need 9 sheets of plasterboard and 3 bags of plaster. If I look at the boarding both sides, I'll want 18 sheets of plasterboard and 6 bags of plaster. In the boarding one side module, I'm also able to change any of the materials using the drop-down menu. I can also check and alter, if required, any of the settings for my fixings, here or in my master copy. And if I am just doing the stud work and not the insulation, plasterboarding or plastering, I can easily just untick the items I do not want and they will be removed. All of the totals for my materials, hours, labour and total cost are shown here along the bottom. My stud work including boarding one side and plaster is done.